All right, this is 7.2 for trigonometry and 6.2 from pre-cal. This is on the law of cosine. So in the last video and lesson, we learned law of sine. And if you saw and if you watched, we created a chart. And every time we had a match in the chart, we would use law of sine. So this is the first time we're going to see that we do not have a match. And that's how you know you have to use these formulas using law of cosine. Okay, we are still in degree mode. Our formulas here are going to be to help us find a side or an angle. Now, if you're in pre-cal, I encourage you just to memorize this top formula, because if you work on isolating these capital letters, these angles, you will get to these formulas without having to memorize them. So for example, let's say I'm looking for angle A. I would subtract B and C squared to A squared, which is how I get this numerator. And then I would divide the negative 2BC, which is how I get this denominator. And then to detach the cosine from the angle, I would do the inverse cosine. Okay? So it is not necessary to memorize both. So if you're in trig and you are using both and you don't want to worry about doing those steps, these are the formulas when you're finding a side, and these are the formulas when you're finding an angle. Again, capital letters are angles, and lowercase letters are sides. Okay, now the important thing with cosine is to check out what you have. Okay, if two of the sides and one angle are given, then it's very important that you find the missing side first, which is using one of these three formulas. Okay, now in the case that all three sides are given, you're going to find the largest angle first. Okay, once you've used the law of cosine to find your next step and you do get a match, feel free to go back to using law of sine, which is a little shorter, and the 180 rule. So let's check out this first question down here. If I fill out my chart, I have capital A, which is 120 degrees. I have little b, which is 8. And then I have little c, which is 10. Okay? If I'm looking at this question on like a homework quiz or test, I see that I do not have a match. That's what lets me know to use law of cosine. Now, the fact that I have two sides and an angle is what lets me know that I'm going to solve for this missing side first. Okay? So according to the formulas, I have a squared equals b squared plus c squared, which is like Pythagorean right there. But then we have this additional part of minus 2bc cosine of capital A. So let's fill in what we know. A is what we are missing. If we want A by itself, I'm going to have to square root the entire right side. Okay? So I'm going to say square root of B squared. So I have 8 squared plus C squared, which is 10 squared, minus 2 times B, which is 8, C, which is 10, times cosine of A, which is 120 degrees. And at this point, as long as you applied your square root and you have the A by itself, you can go straight to your calculator. All right, so if you took a moment to put that in your calculator, it should look something like this. Again, making sure you are in degree mode. I just placed it all in at one step, which I encourage you to do if you're allowed to use your calculator to avoid making small errors. And you should get 15.6 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and, since it's a side, put 3 decimal places. 15.620. Sorry, I said degrees. It's a side. And now that I have a match, I'm going to be allowed to use law of sine. So let's go ahead and work on finding C next. Okay? So now I can say I'm looking for an angle, so according to my rules from last video, I'm going to put the angle up top. Sine of C over 10 equals the match that I have, sine of 120 degrees over this 15.620. Now, of course, the more decimals you put, the more accurate you will be, being that we rounded when we found our answer, okay? So let's multiply that 10 over. And now we have sine of C equals 10 times sine of 120 divided by 15.62. And lastly, to get that c by itself, I need to do the inverse operation of sine. So c is inverse sine of 10 times sine of 120 all over 15.62. Okay, go ahead and take a moment and plug that in your calculator. All right, so in your calculator, this should have come out like this, 33.67 degrees. Because it's an angle, I am going to round that up to 34 degrees. And because we have 2 out of the 3 angles, I can go ahead and use my 180 rule, and I can say 180 degrees minus 120 minus 34. Plug that in your calculator, and you can find your last angle, which is 26 degrees. And you are done with this triangle. Expect when you're doing law of cosine that you will end up doing the law of cosine rule, the law of sine rule, and the 180 rule. Let's check out our next example. All right, so here's your next example. I encourage you to pause the video at this time and try it on your own, and then I'll come back and solve it for you. All right, if you took that moment, let's check this out. So I'm looking at my triangle, and I see that I do not have a match. I don't have 2 A's, 2 B's, or 2 C's. So I know I'm using law of cosine. And again, I'm looking to solve for A. So if I follow the same formula I have here, I have that A is equal to the square root of B squared plus C squared minus 2 times B times C times cosine of angle A. Okay, and the nice thing about these questions, I can go straight to putting it all in my calculator. All right, and in your calculator, it should look identical to what you wrote in your paper. Be careful if you don't have this updated calculator that you write it correctly. And you should have gotten that that side is 26.457. And now you can see that I have a match with A. So let's use it to solve for C. Angle C is what I'm looking for, so that's what I'm writing on the top. And again, the more decimals I write here, the more accurate I'll be. I encourage my pre-cal students when they plug this into the calculator, instead of putting 26.457 to scroll up and use the ANS button on your calculator so you can put the full decimal. So now I'm going to multiply this 30. And if you get used to doing the inverse sign, you can do that already. I'm going to take it slow. Oops, made a little mistake there. All right, and go ahead and put that in your calculator. And in your calculator should look something like this, okay, which gives us 79 degrees. And then we're going to use our 180 rule. And that gives us 41 degrees. All right, and you're done with this example. All right, for our next example, we have all three sides given, okay? We have little b, which is 12, little a, which is 7, and little c, which is 4. We had written in our notes that when this happens, when all three sides are given, it's our job to find the largest angle first. And a refresher from geometry, angles have a relationship with the sides across from them. So that means that the largest angle will be across from the largest side. So if little b is my largest side, that means that capital B is going to be my largest angle out of the three. Okay, and then A would come next, and then C would be the smallest because it has the smallest side. So let's set this up. I'm going to solve this in two different ways, whether you are in pre-cal and trig. If you are using that one formula that you memorized, angle B is found in the formula that has side B. Okay, so if I use b squared equals a squared plus c squared minus 2ac times cosine of b. B is what I'm going to be leaving blank, and I'm going to start filling out these three. So I can say 12 squared equals 7 squared plus 4 squared minus 2 times 7 times 4 times cosine of b, which is what I'm looking for. So first step would be to subtract these two. So I would have 12 squared minus 7 squared minus 4 squared. Then PEMDAS, when I'm solving, tells me to work backwards, so I would detach what is being multiplied by dividing. Okay. And that's what would equal cosine of b. And then lastly, I would do the inverse cosine. So I could say b equals inverse cosine of 12 squared minus 7 squared minus 4 squared over negative 2 times 7 times 4. Okay. If you are in trig, and I gave you that second formula as an option, which was capital B equals inverse cosine of b squared minus a squared minus c squared over negative 2ac, you basically get to the same step that pre-cal did just by using the formula. Okay. Either way, your next step is going to be to plug all of this into your calculator. All right, so when you plug this into your calculator, it should look something like this. It should say error. Now, we talked about last class, that when it says error, it means that this is a no triangle. Okay? So, capital B gave us an error, which means, you know, these three little triangles mean therefore no triangle. And nice thing about no triangle is you get to finish your problem a little early. Okay. Now, whenever you get error, always go back and double check you didn't type something in wrong. But let's talk really quick about why this is a no triangle. All right, so I drew you this as a visual. Let's say these were the sides of the triangles that were taken apart, okay? And I've said this before in class, never trust the diagram that's given to you. Just because they draw something that looks like a triangle doesn't mean it will make a triangle. So if one of the sides are 4 and one are 7 and the longest is 12, use a ruler and draw these out. And you're going to see that there is no way that you can connect these lines to create a triangle, okay? So the rule of thumb, what you would find in a textbook, is that the two smaller sides have to add up to be greater than the largest side. I'm going to say that one more time. Make sure you take a moment and write your notes. And it's that if the two smaller sides do not add up to be greater than the larger side, then this is not a triangle. Let's check out one that does work. All right, so for this next example, they again gave us all three sides. And now we know our rule of thumb to double check before we even start our work. Our two smaller sides are 6 and 4, which add up to give me 10, which is greater than 9, so I'm good to go. If at that moment, like in the last question, 7 plus 4 gives me 11, then 11 doesn't pass 12, I could have stopped there and not have to have done all this work, okay? But here, again, since 6 and 4 make 10, which is greater than 9, you are good to go. This is a question that will work out. So again, the rule is when I have all three sides given, I'm going to look for the largest angle first. In this case, 9 is the largest side, which means B will be your largest angle. So again, feel free to do either of these two methods. Just know in pre-cal you do not have any sort of formula sheet. You must memorize everything, and in trig you do get a formula sheet, so you're allowed to write both down, okay? So for the sake of pre-cal, let's write it out. I'll do both again. I'm going to subtract these 2 over, divide these 3 over, and then lastly we'll do the inverse sine. If you get quick at this, you're going to be able to start going a lot faster, skipping some of these steps. So if you are in trig, you would have gone straight to this step here, plugging in this formula. You would have skipped doing the work on your own. Or if you want to do the work and prepare yourself if you want to take pre-cal next year or cal, feel free to do that method. Okay? And now when we plug that into our calculator, it should look something like this. Okay? Which gives you about 127 degrees. Okay. Now that I have a match, I'm going to use it to find A. So if I'm looking for angle A, I'm going to put sine of A in the top over 6 equals sine of 127. Remember, we rounded. If you use the full decimal to give you a more exact answer. Okay. Move this 6 to the other side, and then you're going to do inverse sine. Don't feel the need to write as many steps as I do. If you feel confident in doing the inverse sine at the same time, you can. And when you plug that in your calculator, you should get something that looks like this, about 32 degrees. And once you have 2 out of the 3 angles, you can go ahead and use your 180 rule. You can say 180 minus 32 minus 127, and that gives you 21 degrees. And you have finished this triangle. All right, for this last question, you have a little image drawn. It says island C is this dot up here. Island B is this one down here, and they're 4 miles apart. 2 miles apart from island B is this dot over here, island A. and then 3 miles apart from island C. Okay, so if we use the sides across from the angles, then we can label them as such. Okay, we can call side A 4, side B 3, and side C 2. Okay, now the question says, if you are on island B, right here, what bearings should you navigate to go to island C? Well, remember that bearings start from north or south and shoot out towards east or west. So if I want a bearing, what I want to know is this angle. And in order to know that angle, I have to be able to solve for angle B. Okay? So angle B is going to be able to help me find my bearing, which is going to go north to west. Okay? So far I know it's going to go north some degrees to west. My job is to find that degrees. And if I find this angle B, I can subtract it from 90 to find out what my bearing is. Now, the only problem is that in law of cosine, when I have 3 sides given, I have to start out by finding the largest angle first. If not, there's like some room for error, okay? The closer the numbers are, the less the error will be. But if these numbers have a greater distance from each other, like this is just 4, 3, and 2. If it was like 2, 17, and 38, then the margin of error, the angle it'll give you, could be way off. So we do have to start by finding angle A, okay? All right, now let's fill in what we know. Start moving things over. If you feel like this goes too fast for you guys, feel free to pause the video, take your time, and then watch me do it a little faster. Remember, if you're in trig, you probably went straight to this step. All right, and then when you plug in your calculator, you should get something like this. Now, let me make a quick comment on the calculator. It's very important that you be careful with your negatives and minuses. For example, in the numerator, this is 4 squared minus 3 squared, which is the button to the right of number 6. Down here in the denominator, this is a negative 2, which is the button underneath the 3. If you mix them up, your calculator will probably give you an error, making you think it's a no triangle. So be very careful with that. In addition, the biggest mistakes I see year-round is people just mixing up the words sine and cosine. Be very careful as to which one you should be putting in, okay? All right, so we have that A is 104 degrees, which now that we have a match, we can use it to find capital B. So I can say sine of B over 3 equals sine of 104 over 4. And go ahead and start maneuvering things around. And in your calculator, it should look something like this. I'm going to round that up to 47. So now that I have this angle B, okay, I don't need to worry about finding angle C. Angle B tells me that if I know this angle, I can subtract it from 90 to find this leftover, which is going to be my bearings. So for the sake of your bearing, you're going to say 90 minus 47, which gives you 43 degrees. And that is your question mark, okay? Which is going to tell you your bearings goes from north 43 degrees towards west. And that is your final answer. Okay?